Dr. Osakwe held several positions within the WTO, from Special Coordinator for LDCs to Chairman of the Interagency Working Group for Integrated Framework. He also served at the permanent missions of Nigeria to the UN, as well as the World Trade Organization. He was appointed in 2010 by former President Goodluck Jonathan as ambassador in situ. He wrote extensively on WTO issues, and one of his research work is the WTO Accessions and Trade Multilateralism, that has been co-authored with Uri Dadouche, who is our senior fellow and also senior associate at Carnegie. It has been 20 years now that the WTO was established in Marrakesh by the Marrakesh Treaty. Would you say it has contributed to the world trade system?
Absolutely. The WTO has done a great job over the past 20 years. There have been considerable achievements in the area of the three pillars of work of the organization: regular work, dispute settlement, negotiations, including in the area where I currently work, which is the area of multilateral negotiations in regular work. That is the enlargement of the organization. As you know, current Director General Roberto Azevedo has worked extremely hard since he became Director General. We now have had, more recently, two successful ministerial conferences, the one in Bali in 2013 that brought into existence a trade facilitation agreement, and now in Nairobi, just in December of last year, historic agreements on agriculture, the information technology agreement, a package for least developed countries. And in the area in which I'm working currently, over the past 20 years, we have had 36 new economies, countries, if you like, joining the WTO. So there is considerable progress, but there's still much to be done. There is a lot to be done, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to talk about some of these areas. So progress, but it's never enough, and there's always scope for more.
Many things. I'm so excited having you on the program. Perhaps we should also be looking to asking you questions about our trade policies and agreement, because if you are the trade advisor to the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, if we have a peek into what our trade policies and agreements are, they can also help the 2017 budget.
Absolutely right, and thank you for having me and for the questions that you have posed. Essentially, this is where we are. Trade is an engine for growth. Trade policies are basically policies for structural reform, for productivity and competitiveness. And the current direction of Nigerian trade policy is to use it very aggressively and very ambitiously to do very specific things. One, to enlarge the market. The Nigerian market is big. It's a market of about 180 million, but beyond the borders in the region, you have the ECOWAS of 300 million. So one of the cardinal objectives of Nigerian trade policy at this time is to enlarge the market for domestic manufacturers here in Nigeria and for services providers. Secondly, in enlarging the market space, we do want to go better, deeper, at a higher level of quality into the ECOWAS market, which many Nigerian manufacturers and services providers feel that we have not done as well as we should have done in the past. In doing that, we need to connect better to regional supply chains and into the African continent, into global supply chains, and then the wider market, the global economy. And thirdly, one of the things that we're trying to do with our trade policy at this time is to respond to the angst, to the serious concerns of many Nigerians, not just the manufacturers and services providers, but also to the consumers, that the Nigerian economy has become a dumping ground for cheap products, low quality products, trade subsidized products by other economies, including those outside of the continent. And so one of the things that we're looking to do
I must say that this is a big win for our president. This is a big win for President Buhari. Remember that the original decision by the African Union heads of state and government to have a CFTA, to have a free trade area covering the continent, was taken in 2012. Even before the incumbent government led by our president, President Buhari. And then the actual negotiations were launched in Johannesburg, also at the summit of African Union heads of state and government in 2015. But really nothing was done until basically a year and a half ago. And we got our marching orders from the president, and he talked with a number of his other colleagues, and we got instructions to go ahead. On the 23rd of February last year, we got our instructions and our negotiating mandate from His Excellency the President. We then, at Nigeria, got elected to chair the technical work at my level, at the level of chief trade negotiators, and then at the ministerial level, chaired by Minister Okechukwu Enelama. So we pushed hard, we pushed very hard, and we built consensus. It's not easy to do that for 55 countries at different levels of economic development on the continent. So this is the background. Major win for our trade policy, major win for our economic policy, major win for our geopolitical presence on the continent as Africa's primary economic power and the 26th largest economy in the world. But basically, there's still a lot of work to do.
Nigeria and Ghana are members of the World Trade Organization. We are together members of ECOWAS. We have a very good relationship that runs, as I said, over 100 years. And one fundamental principle that binds us is non-discrimination. It's a legal provision that connects the two countries. In other words, how is it spelled out? That provision says, either in the WTO or in the ECOWAS protocol, that any condition, privilege, immunity, or preferences that one state party, either in the WTO or ECOWAS, gives to another state party, it must extend unconditionally the same condition, privilege, immunity, and preference with regard to a like product to every other state party. It's a legal provision. We're bound to it on both sides. And so in Nigeria, we cannot discriminate against the Ghanaians with regard to provisions, tariffs, regulations on like products. Likewise, in Ghana cannot discriminate against Nigeria. It's an obligation based on the agreements to which Ghana and Nigeria are party. It can't be done.
What areas would you like to see Nigeria be strategically offensive in terms of Nigeria's market access ambitions in Africa? What areas would you like to see Nigeria strategically defensive for good reasons with the rest of Africa? You see, the constituents, how we compose that 10% is not a decision for government, it's a decision for you. The Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, NASIMA, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. But in doing so, recognizing that in the rule book, when you play, you really can't get unless you give. And that a zone of compromise must be found with others as well.
Developments in the Economic Partnership Agreement, where do we stand currently?
Well, in terms of where Nigeria stands, several clear points. Nigeria will neither sign or ratify it, and for all the right reasons in the world. Our relationship with the European Union is a strategic relationship. It's a relationship that's positive. Our relationship with the European Union is one that we shall continue to build on and consolidate, and we want to take it further. And as I said, the European Union is probably one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, customs union and trading economic groupings in the world. But it will not be on the basis of the Economic Partnership Agreement. And the reason is simple. It's a 20th century agreement. It's not a 21st century agreement. It's AfCFTA minus. It deals with goods, parts of agriculture. That's the EPA. Doesn't deal with services. Doesn't deal with intellectual property. Doesn't deal with the digital economy. So it requires modernization. I think we have to go in.
Is ready on the first day to take up their responsibilities, that they would be champions of the multilateral trading system, that they are committed to the rule of law, and that fundamentally they are ideologically committed to trade opening, liberalization, and not to trade restriction. And of course, for many developing countries who are acceding, including members as well, but for those who are acceding, they want to be sure that their accession process and their WTO membership would make them better off in welfare terms, make them more prosperous, and not make them poorer. But it integrates them, the process of accession integrates them, pulls them into the global economy, enlarges the market space that acceding countries have, and provides them with lots of values: transparency, openness, security of market access, the ability to use the WTO dispute settlement system to resolve the conflicts of trade that emerge inevitably, of course, in trading relations. And that big objective, the pursuit of development, a timeless job.
Nigeria is a leader in Africa. It's a leader on the continent. It's a leader in the global economy. A decision will made. I'm reasonably convinced that Nigeria will do the right thing, but at this moment it shall be a matter for His Excellency President Buhari, and he will take that decision when he is convinced, and we present the evidence to him. We who work for him, we present the evidence to him that we've completed our due diligence domestically. The Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations should be seen as part of a whole range of reforms by our President, His Excellency Mr. Muhammadu Buhari, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I tell you something, it takes a lot of strong will and determination to do the hard things and do the tough things. I was in Addis on the 28th of January this year. when he spoke at the African Union, and the African Union vested him with the authority of being Africa's crusader, if you like, standard bearer on anti-corruption. And that was a moment of pride for every Nigerian. A lot of trade work is about good governance in the area of the economy, and the ease of doing business. The Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council priority is very much coextensive with what the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations was mandated to do. If you watch our president, Mr. Buhari, he's very focused, he's very determined, and he hardly ever swerves from the goals that he has set to do what is right and what will grow the Nigerian economy. The establishment of to implement the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. Secondly, also, what he has done, I'm sure you're aware of that, is that he has approved that we move expeditiously on the ratification after his signing of the agreement on the 7th of July in Niamey, to move rapidly with the ratification of the AfCFTA agreement. We hope that the ratification exercise domestically should be done in about a couple of weeks, no more. Thirdly, on the organization, the office that I head, which has been operating so far on an executive authority, he would like the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations to now be embedded in domestic law.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thank you for that session. First and foremost, we wish to wish Ambassador Osakwe happy birthday today. Today is his 66th birthday, which we are celebrating posthumously, and we believe that wherever he is, he acknowledges that we keep this memory alive for him. So one more time, happy birthday, Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe, on your 66th birthday. You live in us, and we know you live on. You are not dead, because the memories and the legacies you leave behind are still speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the second edition of the Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe's memorial lecture. Ambassador Osakwe was the pioneer, Director General, and Chief Trade Negotiator at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiation. And so this afternoon we have a very wonderful topic to discuss, and that is about regional integration in Africa. Who is implementing the Abuja Treaty? We have the honor and privilege of a prominent, erudite professor of law that will take us through that, and that is the person of His Excellency Ambassador Faizel Ismail, that is the director, Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, University of Cape Town in South Africa. And we have on the panel this afternoon another professor, Professor M.T. Ladan, who incidentally is the Director General, Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. He is already with us here to speak as a panelist. And then someone that have also done so well, if I can recollect, after Chiedu, the next person that, and is still doing that till now, working on the AfCFTA, is no other person than our brother and friend, Mr. Prudence, Sebahizi, who incidentally is the Chief Technical Advisor on the AfCFTA and head of the AfCFTA Negotiation Support Unit at the Department of Trade and Industry of the African Union based in Addis. And so to kickstart this conversation this afternoon is to remind us that African regionalism to us is a means to achieving continental unity, collective self-reliance, and economic transformation, as well as creating an agenda for solving African developmental challenges. Thus, the African Economic Community is a continental trading system that was contemplated by the Abuja Treaty of 1991. But with the advent of the AfCFTA, there is a confusion about the framework of free trade integration in Africa, and that is between the Abuja Treaty and the AfCFTA. And so this discourse of today is to elicit stakeholders' focus on the Abuja Treaty implementation phases and its relationship with the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and privilege to now call on Professor Faizel Ismail to take the floor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to all of you, and it's such a great pleasure to be here on this important event, the birthday of a good friend of mine, Chiedu Osakwe. Thank you to you, Nyavu, for inviting me to this event to say a few words on this second memorial lecture. I know that you have, you could have chosen many others from the many, many friends that Chiedu had accumulated over the many years that he was a public servant. I would like also to extend my respects and humble greetings to his wife, who is here with us today, Ms. Ismail Osakwe, and to his and her children, Emeka, Adanma, and Anize. You may not be on the panel, but I'm sure you'll be listening somewhere, wherever you are. So I wish you all very well. I'm also very honored to be sharing the platform with Professor Mohammed Ladan, who is also a friend and associate of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance. We have a good partnership, a strong partnership with Niles. I'm pleased that Prudence Sebahizi from the AfCFTA Secretariat is also on the panel today, because he can correct anything that I say that may be a misinterpretation of the Abuja Treaty or the AfCFTA. I met with Ambassador Chiedu Osakwe several times just in the few years before he passed away. In 2007, 2008, he was the Director General of the Nigerian Trade Office. He was also the chair of the African Continental Free Trade Area negotiations. I recall our last dinner at his apartment in Abuja, Nigeria in 2018, when he served us a fabulous Nigerian meal and kept us engaged in an animated discussion until late at night. He was curious and conversant about almost every significant global issue, the World Trade Organization, the dynamics of the negotiations in Geneva, the United States, and the European Union and their role in world trade, and about, of course, each and every African country on the continent. Chiedu was interested in their situation and their contribution to the continent. He followed the situation in South Africa very closely too. I learned that This also stemmed from his diplomatic career in New York, where he had served as chair of a UN Special Committee on Apartheid and Decolonization in Africa. Chiedu had met with almost all of South Africa's democratic South Africa's leaders, trade ministers, and presidents, President Mandela and President Thabo Mbeki. He was a key player in the WTO Doha round launch in Geneva and became a trusted advisor to the Director General of the WTO at the time, Mike Moore. He was the first Black African director of the WTO Secretariat. He was no token appointment. Chiedu held his own against the very best in Geneva. He was always well prepared for all the responsibilities he was entrusted with. He read widely. He wrote excellent briefing documents. He understood the diplomatic game very well. I had no doubt that given the opportunity, he would have made a good Director General of the World Trade Organization. He always encouraged me to write and to express the views and perspectives of the African countries. He himself was a scholar and contributed to the debate in the WTO in several journal articles and book chapters. He was very excited about his return to Nigeria and his new role as Director General of the Nigerian Trade Office. He took his job of Chief Negotiator of Nigeria in the AfCFTA very seriously. And on the few occasions that I met him during this time, he displayed his excitement at the huge historic process that was unfolding on the African continent. Today, I'm asked to say a few words about the question that some people are concerned with as we begin the implementation of the AfCFTA. What is the relationship between the Abuja Treaty and the AfCFTA? I will attempt to discuss this question by arguing as follows. First, the Abuja Treaty is still alive. The AfCFTA is a continuation of the historic project that began with the Pan-African movement. And the AfCFTA is a building block in the implementation of the Abuja Treaty. Second, Professor Adebayo Adedeji, a great Nigerian scholar, had a vision for the implementation of the Abuja Treaty that went beyond market integration, as he was one of the original thinkers of the concept of developmental regionalism. And third, I will argue that strengthening developmental governance, peace and security across the African continent is an equally important project for the leaders of the African continent for the realization of the vision of the Abuja Treaty. I'll begin my discussion with the first argument. The Abuja Treaty is still alive, and the AfCFTA is a continuation of this historic project that began with the Pan-African movement. The launch of the AfCFTA on the 21st of March 2018 at the Summit of African Leaders was declared a historic event by President Kagame. Seen from the long lens of history, this was indeed a historic event. It was the most ambitious expression yet of the dream and vision of Pan-African leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, W.B. Du Bois, George Padmore, Leopold Senghor, and others, who had begun the long journey towards African unity and integration since the decolonization and independence of African states in the late 1950s. The formation of the OAU in 1964, formed by independent African states, reignited the vision of regional integration. However, it was only in the early 1980s and 1990s that the vision of regional integration was to be given substantive meaning and programmatic direction by the first Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission of Africa, Professor Adebayo Adedeji. His influential leadership led to the launch of the Lagos Charter in 1975 and the Lagos Plan of Action in 1980. The OAU heads of state adopted the Lagos Plan of Action that called for the integration of the continent based on, and I quote, self-reliance, endogenous development, and industrialization of Africa. The Lagos Plan of Action was criticized by some observers for lacking any detailed plan to implement regional integration. So it took another 10 years, by June 1991, for the OAU to address this gap in its regional integration strategy by adopting the Abuja Treaty. The African Economic Community formed under the Abuja Treaty came into force in 1994. The treaty set out a step-by-step approach to regional integration in Africa with the creation of the Regional Economic Communities, or the RECs, and setting out a path for the creation of an African Economic Community in 6 stages or steps in the process of integration. The first step in this pathway was the creation of free trade areas in each region or sub-region of the continent, followed by customs unions, common markets, and monetary unions. By early 2000, there were 8 significant RECs advancing the process of regional integration within each of the sub-regions of the continent. SADC, the EAC, COMESA, ECOWAS, ECAS, IGAD, UMA, and CENSAT. However, Africa's regional economic communities were already beginning to overlap, creating a so-called spaghetti bowl of overlapping regional arrangements. Some countries were members of more than one REC and had committed to joining more than one customs union, which by definition was impossible to achieve. To break this impasse in the regional integration process and to provide momentum to the process of regional integration, ministers of trade and industry of the 3 RECs, SADC, EAC, and COMESA, led the process of building a free trade area between all 3 of these RECs. So in June 2011, the heads of state of SADC, EAC, and COMESA launched the tripartite free trade agreement negotiations at a summit in Johannesburg. And in the next year, in January 2012, at a summit of the OAU, or of the African Union, African leaders called for the creation of a continent-wide free trade area. It was also during this period that the African Union launched its own 50-year vision on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the OAU, referred to as Agenda 2063. This document, which was also called the Africa We Want, called for a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. As the first of 7 aspirations, its second aspiration is for an integrated continent, politically united, based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. The African Union heads of state met in Johannesburg on the 15th of June 2015 and launched negotiations towards the Continental Free Trade Area. Thus, the AfCFTA was launched on the 21st of March 2018 at a summit of the African Union in Kigali, and President Paul Kagame stated then, "With the signing of the historic agreement, a new chapter in the story of African unity is set to begin." South Africa and Nigeria were not ready to sign the agreement in Kigali. South Africa was to sign the AfCFTA agreement at the next summit of the OAU held in Nouakchott, Mauritania in July 2018. And Nigeria signed the agreement by the time of the summit of the African Union in Niamey, Niger in July 2019. The AfCFTA entered into force on this date, and Wamkele Mene was elected in February 2020 as the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The agreement was to be implemented from the 1st of July 2020, but due to COVID-19, the implementation was postponed to 1st January of 2021. The African Union Summit established an independent secretariat, which is now based in Accra, in Ghana. So the question that some people have been asking is what happens to the existing RECs, such as SADC, the EAC, or ECOWAS? There is an easy answer to this. Article 5B of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement states clearly that the RECs are building blocks of the AfCFTA. The AfCFTA is a free trade agreement. It is a relatively shallow level of integration. Several of the RECs have advanced beyond this, such as the EAC and ECOWAS, which have become customs units. Although they may not have fully reached a common external tariff, they have indeed become customs unions, which is a level that is much deeper than free trade agreements. These RECs can still proceed to deepen their regional integration even further, liberalizing the movement of labor, such as ECOWAS has done, and proceed to monetary and economic integration while implementing the AfCFTA at the continental level. So we can envisage two speeds, one at the continental level, a slow and deliberate process that incorporates the entire continent, and another at each sub-regional level, which could move at different speeds. So my second argument is that Professor Adebayo Adedeji had a vision for the implementation of the Abuja Treaty that went beyond market integration, as he was one of the original thinkers of the concept of developmental regionalism. Most economic observers agree that African economies are too small to compete effectively in the world economy and need to integrate. Several studies undertaken by UNECA economic researchers predict that the AfCFTA has the potential to increase growth, raise welfare, and stimulate industrial development on the continent. However, there are also concerns that some countries, particularly the smaller and more vulnerable countries, may experience the negative impacts of premature industrialization or premature liberalization and fiscal revenue losses. Notwithstanding the many efforts made by African leaders in the 1980s and the 1990s, the process of African integration has been slow and uneven across the continent due to the many challenges of low growth, high levels of debt, political instability, and overlapping regional arrangements. Professor Adebayo Adedeji was a key thinker on the African continent during this period, and as the executive director of the ECA, he produced a groundbreaking report in 1990 titled African Alternative Framework to Structural Adjustment Programs for Socio-Economic Recovery and Transformation, which is sometimes called the AAF-SAP, produced by the ECA in 1990. The report identified the key structural weaknesses in most African economies as that of low productivity and productive activities dominated by either subsistence or export-oriented primary production. He argued that Africa has to break the apron strings of structural and relational dependence on producing a limited number of cheap primary commodities for export. So this is a quotation from Adebayo Adedeji. So Adedeji's document was an alternative to the externally imposed and widely criticized structural adjustment programs of the World Bank and the IMF. Paragraph 47 of the AAF-SAP of Adedeji argued that African integration must involve three mutually interdependent dimensions. A, the integration of African markets. B, the integration of production structures. and C, the integration of the physical, social, and institutional infrastructure. Adedeji's vision thus placed development at the center of regional integration. Adedeji was critical of the narrower vision of mainstream theorists who believed that trade and markets alone could yield major economic benefits for African countries. In my own work, I have built on the work of Adedeji and that of various other writers, including Dr. Rob Davies, Dr. Said Adejumobi, various reports by UNCTAD, UNIDO, and UNECA, and call for an approach to regional integration and the AfCFTA that should be based on the concept of developmental regionalism. Following in the footsteps of Dr. Adebayo Adedeji, many of the African thinkers on trade policy and industrialization, such as Dr. Akebe Okube, Carlos Lopez, Celestine Monga, Rob Davies, and of course, Nigeria's Adeyemi Dipiolu, Tafere Tesfacho, and others have been arguing that transformative industrialization should be at the core of Africa's development strategy. While all these thinkers are also advocates for regional integration of Africa, they have called for trade and industrialization to move in tandem, with trade policy being at the service of industrialization and transformation. The Nelson Mandela School, at which I am currently based, hosted a webinar series during 2020 and 21 in partnership with the AfCFTA Secretariat, which was titled The AfCFTA and Transformative Industrialization. We focused on 3 priority sectors: the cotton, textiles, garments, and retail sector, in which Professor Ladan participated, the agriculture, agro-processing, and retail sector, and thirdly, the vaccines, pharmaceuticals, and healthcare products sector. In each case, we were amazed at the incredible opportunities for the creation of regional value chains reflected in the dialogue between African policymakers, private sector participants, trade unions, and academic researchers. Participants from across the continent discussed how the AfCFTA can be leveraged to create larger markets, provide regulatory frameworks, and strengthen trade facilitation mechanisms to build regional and global competitiveness of African producers. Most importantly, we were able to harness the rich intellectual resources of the continent behind the AfCFTA initiative. These eminent African scholars are keen to share their skills and insights with the AfCFTA Secretariat. Adedeji also foresaw the need for regional integration to include cooperation and coordination of physical, social, and institutional infrastructure. Of the 55 African member states, 34 are least developed countries, 16 are landlocked developing countries, and 6 are small island developing states. The landlocked countries face very specific challenges. They are isolated from world markets and suffer high transit costs, which seriously constrain their overall socio-economic development. African countries, together with the African Union and the NEPA Development Agency, the African Development Bank, and other development finance institutions, are hard at work building cross-border infrastructure projects. A good example is that of the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, which handles more than 2/3 of West African trade, transport, and transit activities. This project aims to improve the road infrastructure between Abidjan and Lagos, as well as modernizing the ports in Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Togo, Benin, and Nigeria. The soft infrastructure component of the operation of the corridor includes customs operations at borders, port efficiency, and reduction of roadblocks along the corridor. The AfCFTA protocol on trade in goods has annexes which require the implementation of agreements on customs cooperation, Annex 3, trade facilitation, Annex 4, and Transit, Annex 4, Annex 8. These agreements can fast-track the implementation of regional development corridors. Ministers of Trade and officials from Customs met with the AfCFTA Secretariat in September of 2021 to confirm their commitment to working together on the implementation of these agreements. And this week, the bilateral summit between President Ramaphosa of South Africa and President Kenyatta of Kenya saw commitments to work together to build port infrastructure and extend the Mombasa-Nairobi corridor and rail corridor to Uganda. Another agreement was to increase collaboration on the building of the Lapsset Development Corridor from Lamu Port to South Sudan and Ethiopia. The AfCFTA should be leveraged to increase collaboration between African governments, the private sector, and domestic and international development finance institutions to mobilize the development finance required for the implementation of cross-border projects. My third point is that strengthening developmental governance, peace and security across the African continent is an equally important project for the leaders of the African continent for the realization of the vision of the Abuja Treaty. It is clear to all of us that peace and security and democracy and governance are essential conditions for socio-economic development and economic transformation. There is a strong relationship between democracy and governance, peace and security, and socio-economic development. Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063 envisions an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. The African Union has established a number of continental institutions to give effect to these ideals. These include the Pan-African Parliament, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, and the African Court on Human and People's Rights. During the African Union Summit held in Durban, South Africa in 2002, the NEPAD Declaration on Democracy, Political, Economic, and Corporate Governance was adopted. The declaration committed African countries to work together in pursuit of the following objectives: democracy and good political governance, economic and corporate governance, socio-economic governance, and the African Peer Review Mechanism. The African Peer Review Mechanism is a voluntary platform for self-assessment and peer review of governance, procedures and institutions by African Union member states aimed at institutionalizing and consolidating democratic governance. We understand that governance challenges on the African continent are complex and deeply integrated with the African development context. Structural inequalities arising from colonization and racism, and struggles for democratization of African countries. At the University of Cape Town Sustainable Development Summit, which was held in September of this year, a large network of African think tanks and academic institutions agreed to work together and share experiences and insights on policies and practices on developmental governance and ethical leadership at national, sectoral, and local levels. While governance and peace and security is not on the agenda of the AfCFTA, the current situation in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Mozambique, and several other African countries are significant setbacks to regional integration and economic transformation on the African continent. And so it seems to me the successful implementation of the AfCFTA will require African leaders to collaborate in addressing these challenges. And finally, I'd like to say that the discussion that I set out has argued that developmental regionalism is an approach to the AfCFTA that was first advocated by Professor Adebayo Adedeji. And this approach has begun to gain traction across Africa. his approach to regional integration in Africa has great potential to catalyze and accelerate a virtuous circle of regional trade integration, transformative industrialization, cross-border infrastructure, and developmental governance, and peace and security across the continent. The launching of the AfCFTA on the 21st of March 2018 and its implementation on the 1st of January 2021 is a landmark in the historic journey of Africa to realize the dreams of Pan-African leaders and the Abuja Treaty for a united, integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa. I have also argued that the Abuja Treaty is still alive. So is the spirit and ideas of the great African thinker, Professor Adebayo Adedeji, who carried the torch of the Pan-African leaders and advanced the project of regional integration in his time. Chiedu Osakwe was a good student of history. He understood the weight of responsibility he carried as the chair of the AfCFTA negotiations that delivered the AfCFTA agreements. I am sure he will be smiling to see his good friend and collaborator in this project, Wamkele Mene, assume the position of Secretary General of the AfCFTA and continue to carry the torch as we finalize the outstanding issues in the negotiations and implement the AfCFTA. I thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you very much. You know, one of the things we'll be missing during this online digital meeting is how to clap and clap very well. You know, we would have given you a... Okay, we can see clap. I think we can see our hands. So thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much for that wonderful keynote. It's laced with historical facts and aspiration for the continent. I think very key to what you just said is that the Abuja Treaty is still alive, and we hope that all we aspire, even in the Agenda 2060, 63 rather, that we all achieve them. We've already done 1 full hour now, so we have the next few minutes left to deal with the other issues. But I especially want to recognize Adeyemi, who is also a good friend to Ambassador Osakwe. Doctor, good day to see you here. So very quickly we go back to the panelists, starting with Professor Ladan. Prof, it is clear from the presentation that what happened to the existing regs, and Professor Faizel told us that they exist side by side. So taking off from there, what's your stake on the Abuja Treaty? Where do you think we are at the moment, and what do we need to do differently in order to make sure that the Abuja Treaty and the AfCFTA and the regs also run on their full course? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to serve on the panel with our distinguished African scholars and thinkers on this subject matter. And I would also like to put it on record that the subject matter itself is at the heart of Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies for one reason, that the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies happens to be the first African Legal Research Institute as a think tank body to have organized an international conference 2 years after the adoption of the Abuja Treaty in Lagos. The Institute of Advanced Legal Studies organized the international conference in 1993, even a year before it was actually, made to enter into force in 1994. And the subject matter of the international conference was the African Economic Community Treaty of 1991, Issues, Problems, and Prospects. And we produced, as an institute, for the very first time in Africa, on the subject matter, a 450-page conference proceedings. and it's still available. So I agree, first and foremost, with Ambassador Faizel that the Abuja actually Treaty on AEC is not only alive, but in my view, it is also kicking. It is alive and kicking. So I'll add kicking. And I have three reasons for that, because the organizers want us to understand, at least to respond to three questions. The first question that organizers want us to address at this actually, our program is that what is the nature of the regional integration in Africa in the context of the role of REX? Who is implementing the Abuja Treaty? That was the second question. And then the third issue that they want us to address is also the phases of the roadmap under the Abuja Treaty on AEC. So in my view, the Abuja actually Treaty 1991, which ended in force in 1994, is very much alive and kicking, because there are three core issues under the first question. And the regional integration actually has its legal foundation, rooted first and foremost, in the Abuja Treaty of 1991 on African Economic Community. And this treaty set out a 6-phase ambitious roadmap with timelines that were never met or were at times actually missed. Second, the Abuja AEC Treaty, had Article 6, which set out clearly that the regional economic communities, were meant actually to be the building blocks of the continental free trade area. And the same Article 6, provided a 6-phase roadmap. And incidentally, it placed continental free trade area as the third phase. It started with phase 1, strengthening the REX within the 5 years of its coming into force. Number 2, or phase 2 of Article 6 of the treaty on AEC, said you need to actually eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers as phase 2. Then it's placed phase 3 to be establishment of the continental free trade area. So you can see that there is no confusion at all in terms of the relationship between AfCFTA agreement on continental free trade area and the Abuja Treaty on AEC. There is no confusion, because the agreement on the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area was already envisaged by the Abuja Treaty on AEC. It was envisaged first by Article 6, and then Article 4 read together, and then from the roadmap that clearly made Continental Free Trade Area establishment as phase 3. Now, if you look at the timetable set out by the ambitious roadmap of the African AEC Treaty of 1991, the Abuja Treaty, you can clearly see that if you start by the adoption date 1991, then we only miss 2 years of the coming into force of the Continental Free Trade Area as phase 3. But if you start with the date of entry into force of the Abuja Treaty of 1991 on AEC, that is 1994, then you can say that we took off on the Continental Free Trade establishment as phase 3 exactly in 2019, as envisaged by the treaty. So there is no confusion at all. And I would like to say that the timeline and the vision was actually consistent. So it depends on the timetable you are using. If you use the adoption date, we miss 2 years for coming to force of the Continental Free Trade Area. That is after. But if you use the entry into force date, 1994, we exactly arrive at the vision and mission of the Abuja Treaty of 1991 for us to have a Continental Free Trade Area by 2019, and we got it in 2019. So the date that you use is very important. Either use the adoption date or the entry into force date. Now, either way, we could even have missed only the timetable for the Continental Free Trade Area only by 2 years. Worst case scenario. Now, my third point actually is that the AEC Treaty is still alive and kicking, because by the 1995 United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA report of 1995, it gave us actually a progress report on the implementation of the Abuja Treaty. At the instance of the AU Secretariat. So the report actually revealed the progress of implementation from 1995. It was at that actual level that the AU Secretariat decided to say, okay, fine, we want to rationalize and harmonize over 40 intergovernmental organizations in Africa with overlapping functions and mandates, with lack of capacity to be able to achieve their objectives, consistent with the Abuja AEC Treaty of 1991. And the result of that actually decision of the AU Secretariat, resulted into the rationalization of the 40 intergovernmental organizations to be pruned down as part of the rationalization to 8 that we have it today. So there was a conscious move by the AU Secretariat, and today you can call that AU Commission, and you can give the credit also to the AU Assembly of Heads of State. So the second question that the organizers wanted us to actually address at this particular lecture is, who is implementing the Abuja Treaty? And the truth of the matter actually is that there are 3 actually players. The RECs that were pruned down or rationalized from about 40 intergovernmental organizations to 8 today, and the AU Commission that started from an AU Secretariat, and then the third player in the implementation of the Abuja Treaty is the Assembly of Heads of State of the African Union. So there are 3 players actually implementing the Abuja Treaty, and the Abuja Treaty has never ceased to be implemented. That is the truth. Now, let me also actually put one point clear, that it is true that the Abuja Treaty under Article 6 made the 8 RECs pruned down from 40 to 8 to be the building blocks, not for the African Economic Community, but for the Continental Free Trade Area, very specific, under Phase 3. Now, what happened was that the RECs, historically, actually to date, you can say that they actually moved from the stumbling block to the building blocks, because they met a lot of roadblocks, in their effort to promote regional economic integration at the regional level, and then to contribute as building blocks to the continental actually regime. So they survived the roadblocks, and all the hurdles, political, economic, social, legal, institutional capacity, infrastructure capacity or deficit, and even institutional capacity. All these were actually obstacles, or if you like, roadblocks that they met on the road, historically speaking, to date. But they managed to survive all the roadblocks and the hurdles, and then you can actually say that they are at least at the level of moving actually from the stumbling blocks for the Continental Free Trade Area envisaged by the Abuja Treaty to building blocks. So I think the vision, of the founding fathers of the Abuja Treaty, in making Continental Free Trade Area Phase 3 was actually correct. And I think they got even the timeline and the ambitious roadmap also fairly correct. And therefore, in my view, I believe strongly that we can also actually move to address the second question. Who is implementing the Abuja Treaty? The Abuja Treaty, is being implemented by 3 players. And I repeat, 3 players. The RECs that were rationalized from 40 to 8. If you look at their founding treaties and their revised actually treaties and other legal frameworks, they have tried as much as possible to reflect the vision and the objectives and even the roadmap, of the African Economic Community Treaty of 1991 into their legal framework as part of their community objectives. Now, it is also true that the regional economic communities essentially, were actually created under different structures. They have different processes, they have different ambitions and goals, and they also have different pace in terms of development and then achieving their regional economic objectives, and even in the realization of the Abuja, 1991 treaty, objectives and vision. But what is important is that just a different pace, there are different institutional capacity, there are different actually goals, and even there are divergent actually perception about how best to realize the objectives of the Abuja Treaty. They've tried their best to date, to ensure that they've actually met that vision and objectives of the Abuja Treaty at least halfway. Because you can see clearly from their implementation of their own, regional treaties and the revision in terms of programs and projects, and even the revision to make them meet up the vision and mission of the Abuja Treaty. That is a signal that the Rex were really actually committed to the Abuja Treaty vision. They were also really committed to also the 6-phase ambitious roadmap that the Abuja Treaty has set out for them. And so they wanted to live up to that expectation as the building blocks, not as stumbling blocks. And I think we can give credit to the Rex because the Rex have actually managed to survive all the roadblocks. And as of today, you can actually give them the credit of being the rebuilding blocks for the Continental region area, under the agreement on AfCFTA. And my third point actually is that if you are looking for evidence on why I said the Rex, AU Assembly of Heads of State, and the AU Commission from Secretariat to Commission were the three players, and they still remain the three players implementing actually the Abuja Treaty. Look at actually what the AU Assembly Heads of State and the Commission have done. Number one, in 2011, there was actually an inter-African trade, plan of action that was actually put in place by the AU Assembly. And in 2012, the same AU Assembly established, or adopted a decision to establish, the African Free Trade Area, and by virtue of it also the agreement on AfCFTA. This was in 2012, by AU Assembly. And this actually made the AU Assembly a key player in implementing the Abuja Treaty vision and roadmap. And they didn't stop at the 2012 decision. They went also further, in 2018, 2019, to ensure that the agreement of AfCFTA, became actually, effective, and also it came into fruition. That is the third stage. Then number four, another effort by the AU Assembly and AU Commission is that they actually brought on board the Agenda 2063. And Agenda 2063, has actually pillars that aim at ensuring that, we are actually essentially, trying to actually operationalize the vision and mission roadmap, ambitiously set out, by the Abuja Treaty of 1991. And I would like to also draw attention to the fact that, on the issue of, yes, Sam, you have your hand.
1 minute more.
Okay, 1 minute more. Okay, yeah. On the third issue that we were asked to address, that is the phases actually of the Abuja Treaty. I would like to actually draw attention to the fact that I think Article 6 of the Abuja Treaty was actually very ambitious, but I think what is important is that it provided the 6-phase roadmap. Phase 1 is about strengthening regional economic communities, within 5 years of the adoption of the Abuja Treaty. And you can actually see Article 88, Subsection 3 of the Abuja Treaty, aim at supporting Article 6 to show how you need to strengthen the Rex. And I think the Rex have been strengthened to some extent, and even the ones that were dead, some decades back, were revived deliberately, and the ones that were actually alive were strengthened actually up to the expectation. And I think we are still continuing to strengthen the Rex, and I think that's what's important. So phase 1, vision 1, ambition roadmap 1 is still alive. Number 2, under Article 6 of the Abuja Treaty, is the second phase, and that is elimination of tariffs that are non-tariff barriers and among member states, but also to adopt a common trade policy like common external tariff against members of the regional bloc. And the Abuja Treaty Article 6 set out 8 years as the ambitious timeline to achieve that. We have missed that target, but at least the Rex have put structures ground and have also put implementation measures on ground to realize this actually is too ambition. And let me refer you to Articles 29 to 33 of the Abuja Treaty that set out the modalities in the Abuja Treaty on how we can eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers. And this has been accommodated by the Rex in order to make the Abuja Treaty alive. Number 3 is phase 3, and that is establishment of a free trade area. Here, the Abuja Treaty gave an ambitious 10-year timeline from the adoption period or from the date of Article 24. And in summary, I would like to say that Articles 33 to 35 of the Abuja Treaty clearly set out the modalities on how to establish the Continental Free Trade Area. So the Abuja Treaty is alive, even at the heart of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement after. It's very much alive because it set the tone and the modalities, and it also provided actually the pathway. Then, phase 4 under Article 6 is that we need to establish a customs union, and it gave 2 years as an ambitious actually timeline, and you can actually see the modalities to achieve the timeline under Article 35 to 40 of the Abuja Treaty. And then finally, we have the common market, which the Abuja actually, treaty, Article 6, provided actually a 25 years ambitious timeline. Very ambitious timeline, 25 years to achieve that. It's not easy to achieve a common market, setting a timeline as far back as 1991. But
okay, thank you, Prof. I think, because of time, yes. I think we captured all these issues, and I think you've actually given a background to.
In conclusion, I would like to say that there is no confusion. I think the moderator started by giving us the impression that there is this confusion among analysts or commentators, as to where does the Abuja Treaty stands in the context of the AfCFTA agreement. In my view, I agree with Professor Ismail. There is no confusion in the first place. They are actually very working harmoniously, and the division of one is also integrated in the progressive relation of the objectives of the other. And so they are moving actually on the same actually pathway, except that the target for achieving actually these phases of the Abuja Treaty is what we're missing by 1 year or by 2 years, depending on whether you are using the adoption date or you are using the entry into force date. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. I think we can also do a clap for you this time around as well. Thank you so much for giving us that background. And I think, there are quite a lot of students, both postgraduate and PhD students rather, that are already online with us, and I'm sure they are getting some insight on some of these issues. At this point, I will get back to my brother Prudence very key from what Professor Faizel have also raised is about Article 5, which deals specifically with the principles of the AfCFTA, as it were. So the question is, from your own perspective, the AfCFTA talks about the agreement being a member-driven agreement, and at the same time coming to say the regs are building blocks. That confusion, even if you don't want to use that word, is there. So over to you for us to get some clarity from that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nuyabu, for putting together this webinar. Let me start by greeting everyone who is here on the call. I'm very glad to meet with you virtually. And more importantly, I'm happy to see Ms. Osakwe, whom I have not seen before, even if I have spent sleepless nights with her husband. There is a lot to share about Professor Osakwe, but I take him as my inspiration during the process of the AfCFTA negotiations, when he was leading the process indeed. Let me also acknowledge the fact that Professor Faizel, when he speaks about Africa and Africa's integration process, I think there is nothing that I can add. He has preempted almost every point that I wanted to make. And now also listening to Professor Ladan, I'm very happy that he put more emphasis on Article 6 of Abuja Treaty, which says it all in terms of the continental integration agenda. Let me come straight to your question. The principles of the AfCFTA, of course, there are 10 of them, but the one that the AfCFTA is member states driven vis-a-vis the role of regional economic communities. At the start of negotiations, it was very clear in our mind that both member states and regional economic communities were going to play a critical role in the AfCFTA process. And that principle, the way it was crafted, was member states, stroke, RECs, and customs unions driven, because we knew that AfCFTA was going to build on the acquis of regional economic communities. By the way, the principle of the acquis itself was also based on what regional economic communities have achieved that could not be ignored during the process of AfCFTA negotiations. And now when you look at the architecture of the AfCFTA, you will have member states that have been actively negotiating the agreement, but you will also see the role that regional economic communities have played, especially in coordinating the positions of member states. Let me give you 2 examples. One, when you look at regional economic communities that have reached the level of customs union, such as East African Community, such as ECOWAS, SACU in SADC, all of them, of course CEMAC in ECAS as well, all of them have made tariff offers jointly as a bloc. You will see ECOWAS, 15 member states of ECOWAS that were joined by Mauritania to make them 16, have submitted one tariff offer, which means that in their process of integration into the AfCFTA, they did not forget that they have already achieved a customs union at regional level, and they did not want to undermine their common external tariff. Thus, they decided to present a joint tariff offer to the AfCFTA. And they did the same for trade and services. And this is the case for East African Community. This is the case for CEMAC. This is the case for SACU. That's number one. Number two, when you look at the implementation structure of the AfCFTA, we have the AfCFTA Secretariat, which is an institution to coordinate the entire process. But you also have regional economic communities secretariats. The same role that the AfCFTA Secretariat is playing today is exactly the same role that regional economic communities secretariats are playing at regional level. And there is nothing that we can achieve at AfCFTA Secretariat if we do not collaborate closely with regional economic community secretariats. And in fact, in September, we had our first meeting between AfCFTA Secretariat with CEOs, Chief Executive Officers of regional economic communities. And we have come up with a comprehensive matrix of collaboration in different areas of the AfCFTA agreement. So we have broken down all areas of AfCFTA agreement into actionable strategies where the AfCFTA Secretariat will play a role and regional economic communities will play their own role. And member states are at the heart of that process because implementation takes place at national level. But member states are always assisted by those institutions that they have put in place, including their regional economic communities and the AfCFTA Secretariat. So it is very much clear for us that from a legal perspective, the AfCFTA agreement recognizes officially the role of regional economic communities as building blocks. And from institutional perspective, it is also very much clear that the mandate of the AfCFTA Secretariat can only be delivered in collaboration with secretariats of regional economic communities. And from policy perspective, when you look at the content itself, the content of the agreement, in terms of coordinating positions, in terms of building the capacities of member states, in terms of even sensitizing stakeholders, the same activities that we undertake as the AfCFTA Secretariat can only succeed in a collaboration with regional economic communities. I think that one is very, very much clear to me. The final point which I wanted to make, and which I think, again, Professor Ladan wanted to emphasize further, is with regard to the next step of the continental integration. The AfCFTA is not an end. It's a process, of course, looking at the scope of the AfCFTA itself, which goes beyond, far beyond free trade area. It encompasses all elements of developmental regionalism, which Ambassador Faizel has emphasized: industrialization, infrastructure development. All those developmental aspects are embedded in the AfCFTA agreement. So if we implement the AfCFTA agreement fully, I'm quite sure that we would have achieved the objectives of the continent. Secondly, the ultimate goal of the Africa's integration agenda within Abuja Treaty is to achieve African Economic Community. Again, I'm very much convinced that apart from the name, if we implement the AfCFTA fully, we would have achieved a common market, we would have achieved African Economic Community. I know all financial institutions of African Union have been established by the AU Constitutive Act. So all of them are there already. When you read the African Union Constitutive Act, all the financial institutions have been created. All developmental institutions of African Union are already there. All policies, all protocols in all aspects, including free movement of persons, are there. So it's just a matter of joining our efforts and implement them. Then in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll be celebrating the African Economic Community. So thank you very much. I think I have clarified on that one.
Yeah, thank you so much, Prudence. I appreciate that insight as well. San, I was asking, do we have questions from audience before we ask the Prof to make?
Not at the moment, but someone is raising. I think Amara. I'm not sure if she wants to ask a question or she just raised her hand has been up for some time. Oh, it's down now.
Okay. Amara, are you hearing now? Amara, are you there?
Okay. Someone's name is Registry. Can the person? Can you ask a question using the Q&A button? Wow.
The question is already
okay. Aisha Umar, can you ask your question? Your hand is up, Aisha, and then Dr. Femi Badejo. Aisha, are you there?
The technical person has to just unmute them, if it's possible.
There are two questions already in the question book, so they can be read out.
Okay, Amara say it was an error. Okay, understood. Registry, okay. Who is registry?
Okay, let us see, can we take the question in the question and answer session? I think one of the questions from the registry is, what are the things affecting Abuja Integration Treaty recently, and what is the the other one? So what meaning of economic integration?
Okay, I think they will come to that so we can take all the questions. Dr. Femi Badejo, can you hear us?
Okay,
I think registry has been unmuted.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Femi. Can you unmute Dr. Femi, please? Okay. Dr. Femi, can you go ahead?
Yes, how are you? Yes, it's nice to be here, and I must commend you guys for the provoked topic you are handling today, and I must equally join in celebrating my late friend, Ambassador Osakwe, whom I've had cause to equally work with at some point in time. Having said that, I just want to, as a follow-up to what the two young men, the two professors have said, that hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, that the Abuja Treaty is a follow-up to the ACFTA. So I just want to make that comment that absolutely it's on course, and they really tally. So it's clicking according to Professor what's his name again? So I think I want to agree absolutely. So having said that, I have one or two issues of concern about the ACFTA. I don't know how best and how soon with the issue of the rules of origin that has really affected some few regs over time. How best can that be resolved so that the so-called ACFTA can be free of that of that same quagmire? Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we got you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm okay now.
Very good. Let me address that one because I think it falls directly under the work that we are doing. We are very, very much optimistic that outstanding negotiations on rules of origin will be concluded very soon. In fact, on the 10th of October, when ministers of trade met in Accra, they approved up to 87% of AfCFTA rules of origin. This means that all the products that will be traded within AfCFTA, if you take about 7,000 products that have to be traded across the continent, at least more than 5,000 have now got rules of origin. And a few sticky areas, which include automotive industry, textile and apparel industry, some chapters on fisheries and edible oils are still under negotiations, and we are very much optimistic that early next year we would have concluded all of them. There is a ministerial retreat which will be hosted by Egypt in January, which aims to dig deep into all those outstanding issues, look at policy implication, and adopt the final outstanding rules of origin. So at 7% that has been achieved so far is very encouraging, considering that AfCFTA rules of origin were negotiated on a product-specific basis. Each and every product had to be looked at in terms of the production process, in terms of what value addition do we want to achieve within the continent, of course, to respond to the key objective of rules of origin, which is promoting industrialization on the continent. So the two objectives of rules of origin, one is to promote industrialization, to make sure that you add value to a product that is produced from Africa before you take it to the market. You add value. The rules of origin will be able to decide on which value addition, and they would also be able to decide on which level of local content that has to be in that product before it qualifies for preferential treatment on AfCFTA market. The second objective of AfCFTA rules of origin is to deal with issues of transshipment, issues of trade deflation, where some countries might, of course, import products from outside the continent for their own consumption objectives. And if there are no rules of origin, those products may end up flooding the AfCFTA market. So the rules of origin will be able to deal with that issue so that no product can be imported from China and then enjoy the preferential treatment of the AfCFTA market. So we hope that the AfCFTA rules of origin will achieve those two objectives.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Right. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Can I speak on one of the questions from the registry?
Yes, just 2 minutes, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Okay. I just want to pick actually the question that has to do with is there any problem associated with the Abuja Treaty implementation, in its interaction with the AfTA agreement?
Drilling.
That was on what? Hello, what did you say?
Sorry about it. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, all right. So, in my view, if you look at Articles 18 and 19 of the AfTA agreement, particularly Article 19.2 and Article 18 of the AfTA agreement, read it together with Article 4, subsection 2 of the AfTA protocol on trade in goods, you will find actually that, first let's speak of the implication of Article 18 of the AfTA agreement on continental preferences. It provides actually the impression that the existing trade agreement will continue, among the regs, and the AfTA shall not nullify, modify, or revoke rights or obligations under such pre-existing trade agreements that state parties have entered with third parties or third countries. All right. It is arguable whether this particular provision, in terms of its implication, has actually something to do with reducing the legal commitment contained already in Articles 37, subsection 1 of the Abuja AEC Treaty, and even in Article 5G of the AfTA agreement, as well as Articles 4, common to the protocols on trade in goods and services, dealing with the principle of the most favored nation treatment. Now, it's a moot point whether the implication of the provision of Article 18 of the AfTA agreement, reduces any potency of the AEC, agreement, AEC provision on Article 37, subsection 1. And I think when people are actually trying to look for whether actually there's a tension between AfTA agreement provisions and the AEC treaty, this is one clear provision, that it is set against AfTA agreement. And I think this is one area that we can tidy up. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Very quickly, I'm seeing quite some person's hand. I don't know if Dr. Deninka Demi want to say something, just a few words. Madam Informer, I'm coming. I'm seeing your hand. Dr. Deninka.
Barrister Legosi, sorry, can you look at the Q&A session? There are questions there already. People have typed already Q&A session.
The other one come from somebody say, I'm able to get the question. Can it be repeated? I mean the question from Dr. Femi asked. I didn't was not clear about that. Then I said the objectives of what I'm able to get it. The question is not too clear about, maybe the person need to retype. Okay, Madam Informer, please go ahead. Unmute her. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Ismail. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My question, more or less, is on Nigeria's continued leadership with the process that my elder brother had started on with regards to the WTO and Micah being the director there. Is there anything that the office is doing to continue with leadership with regards to this? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Informer. I think we would direct that to maybe, okay, Professor Faizel, it will come back to you because you double in that direction. Maybe you give us insight more. But before you do that, sir, you can just add this. We have the issue of treaty conflict in Africa. And that is having the treaty, the Abuja Treaty in place. And let's be real, we talk more about AfCFTA now, and few persons talks about the AEC treaty, as it were. And that is where we say the concern is. And let's not dodge away from it. Who do we direct questions about the Abuja Treaty to? Where? Which office? Today we have a secretariat that is implementing the AfCFTA. Which department, under which coordination is the Abuja Treaty being driven? We have to still go back to that question. Thank you. Professor Faizel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, that's not an easy question to answer, but I really think that, we are in a dynamic process. The world that Professor Adedeji lived in the 1980s and the 1990s was very different, very, very different, especially for Africa, because the economic situation of the continent was vastly different. And of course, countries were in the process of just decolonizing. There were still lots of conflicts and neocolonial conflicts. And of course, many countries like South Africa were not free. So what we have seen in the last 2 decades, in this new millennium, is a massive change from the 80s and the 90s, which were perhaps, many writers say, those were lost decades for the continent. We really didn't make much progress economically. But now the continent is much more confident, and we do have opportunities to engage with each other and to fashion our future as in response to the conditions we find ourselves in today. And I think that the question about how we move forward and how we make the AfCFTA compatible with the Abuja Treaty is a policy question. It is a legal question too, but it's a policy question. It is something that senior policymakers, negotiators, like Chiedu Osakwe and his colleagues who were leading the AfCFTA, they can discuss this. And perhaps, they could invite people like Professor Ladan and Niles and other institutions and now we have many on the continent, many PhD students and students who have obtained their PhDs in law and trade law, and who can discuss the legal questions and help us move forward. But really, the policy issues are issues that should be discussed by policymakers, and we should be charting a way forward which is consistent with the objectives that the Pan-African leaders, people like Professor Adebayo Odedeji, and our current leaders, who all have the same objective in mind, which is to integrate the continent in a way which advances the economic development of the continent, and which advances the project of industrialization, building intra-regional cross-border infrastructure, and ensuring that we are able to build a more peaceful and prosperous continent. So those are the more general objectives, which also Agenda 2063 has now set out for the next 50 years. So there's a consistency, I see between what the Pan-Africanists, vision and how the continent has begun to move forward now. And really, there is no, black and white, very simple solution to the issues we're dealing with. They are complex, but there are issues which can be solved and through discussion and dialogue. And what I encourage is really more of this discourse that you have started, Nyabu, with this memorial lecture series, to enable us to discuss and to fashion ways forward which are consistent with the conditions we find ourselves in. And the faster we can move, we should take that opportunity as it arises, but we shouldn't try to straitjacket ourselves into some legal framework which, is not suitable to the conditions that we find ourselves in today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're about spending the next 2 hours, and I think we cannot exhaust everything today. We just have 10 more minutes left, and we at this point, though there are questions in the question box, Tem is, okay, somebody is asking, how do we handle the concern of dollarization or Euroization of the entire African continental economy, deepening foreign tentacles instead of freeing Africa? Then the second question is, please allow me to commend you for conducting this webinar as a contribution to our future One Africa concept. We all have a lot of work to do ahead. Keep it up. Please let us know when intellectual contributions are needed to support the Abuja Treaty for Economic Strategy for Africa. Bless all of you. That is from Dr. Tessia Hembel, People of Africa in USA. And then Ngozi Mozie is asking, will state parties to the framework agreement establishing AfCFTA require bilateral agreement to trade, noting that any preference you afford a party shall be extended or afforded to the others? And then finally, okay, Aisha, you say you have a question. Can you go ahead before I call on the panelists to respond to one or two? Aisha, do you want to speak? Can you unmute Aisha? Aisha Umar.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. I'll make it really fast. My question has to do with the issue of phytosanitary standards and technical standards. Are we saying that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will lower those standards? Because I know that one of the issues that African countries are having with access to markets, overseas global markets, is the issue of standards. Are we going to lower the standards because we're in Africa? I need answered, and also issue of labor standards, environmental issues are now being introduced into the equation. So how is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement going to deal with these issues?
Okay, thank you. That goes straight to Prudence. So can you just respond to that, Prudence? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting. AfCFTA is not going to lower standards. AfCFTA is actually going to upgrade the standards of Africa. If you look at the pattern of trade among African countries and among Africa and the rest of the world, you realize that Africa has been exporting unprocessed products and importing everything that we consume. So we have not given chance to African users to even meet international standards because what we are trading is not sufficient. I think there's someone else's microphone that is on.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yes. We have not given chance to African producers to even try to comply with international standards because of the situation that we are in when it comes to trading with the rest of the world. What the AfCFTA market has done is to set standards for Africa because for you to trade within AfCFTA, you have to meet the standards. And those standards will not be less than the international standards. The AfCFTA will allow producers to build their capacities to be supported by the quality infrastructure organizations on the continent to make sure that those standards on the continent are also developed. I think that one is very clear. I also want to talk about the issue of currency in 1 second because I know someone raised an issue of dollarization. I think the next step for Africa is to look at how we can come up with a common currency. Because when you increase transactions across the continent, there will be definitely need to transact in one currency. Currently, we are trying to see how for two currencies across the continent, we speak to each other in terms of convertibility, because the transaction cost itself, when it comes to converting our currencies to each other, has been very high and has been costing Africa more than $5 billion every year, because you have to convert in dollar or euro before you convert it to another African currency that you are going to trade in. And if we do Africa's common currency, I think we would have resolved that issue of transaction cost, but not only the transaction cost, but also we are going to increase the amount of transactions that will happen across the continent. Currently, research have revealed that countries with common currency can trade more than 200% more than those that are trading in different countries. So I imagine if that theory holds, Africa's intra-African trade can multiply by 200% if we are trading in one currency. And I think that one has to be considered by policy makers.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we have a lot to say. We have a lot to discuss. We have a lot to contribute. We have a lot of concerns that is already very clear for us to deal with, but we cannot finish everything today. I want at this moment to call on Madam Ime to just give us some few words and then we can wrap up this evening. Thank you.
Very short. Thanking everyone who has participated in this memorial lecture. As always, I have been thoroughly educated, thoroughly enlightened, and I can see the rollout of this AfCFTA is years in the making. So thank you, Leposi, for this convening, and honestly, it's a fantastic platform to bubble up ideas, to exchange ideas, and also to address issues that are pertinent to the continent. So I'm looking forward to the next season next year. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
All right, thank you. So one word from Professor Faizel. What do we do next?
Thank you so much. Thanks to Ima. It's so lovely to see you. I haven't been to Geneva for a long time, but the spirit of Chiedu Osakwe is certainly, I think, in the room today. And, he would have advocated for us to discuss, and discuss the challenges, be as creative and innovative as possible, and advance the project of regional integration on the continent. So I think in that spirit, I would also support the idea that this forum can be a platform for debate, for discussion, for discourse, and for introducing younger people to the same, I think, road that Chiedu traveled, which is to advance the ideas and the interests of the continent wherever you find yourselves, here in Africa, but also in across the world in multilateral and bilateral trade with the rest of the world. So thank you so much to all of you for inviting me to participate in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Professor Ladan, just one word. What is the next, or what do you think should be the way forward? Thank you.
In my view, I believe strongly that we need to sustain the legacy of the late, ambassador and thinker. He has actually, given his best to Africa and to the world. It's our actually turn to actually immortalize him through continuing search for the best for Africa. I think that is just the way forward.
All right. Thank you so much. And then Prudence, what do we do next? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I can only wish that this platform that we use to remember the legacy of Professor Osakwe can be institutionalized in the AU, the history of African Union. We are here to be the testimonies of what Professor Osakwe has provided to the continent, what has he contributed to the process of AfCFTA integration. I think if there is an idea which could come from any of Professor Osakwe's friends or member of the family to institutionalize this platform, I think it will be very much welcome. I just want to throw a wish on this so that you can look at it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It's taken note of, and then collectively we can do that. I mean, it's not going to be one person's effort. All of us, we put our resources, our heads together to ensure that we immortalize him and then make this platform an institutional platform that will go beyond this. Hope that by the third edition, there will be improvement and some other key element will be introduced as well. And we pray that by then COVID would have traveled far away from us so that we can provide and meet physically as well. So one more time, Sam, you have some few things to say?
Nothing much, really. I want to thank Madam Ime for honoring and being part of us today, and also thank my supervisor, Professor Faizel, for taking time and then giving us this historic background of things and then bringing us into contemporary understanding of how these things work. Truly, I agree with you that Abuja Treaty is alive. We're just pushing it. And also agree with Professor Ladan. Thank you very much for honoring us. And Prudence, thank you very much for always standing and holding the torch. You give us hope. You give us that booster to say, yes, if someone like Prudence is still standing up and pushing for what Africa stands for, we should do more as well from the private sector perspective. And I want to say especially thank you to you, Legacy, for holding the torch and standing by what our mentor stands for. That is uniting Africa and using knowledge to drive African industrialization. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for also honoring us to be part of this today. Thank you.
Yeah, finally, thank you everyone. There are a lot of good remarks in the question box, commendations and all that. Together we're going to make it work and work well. And so thank you. Have a great evening and see you at the 67th birthday next year. Thank you and God bless you. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prudence. Thank you, Ambassador. And thank you, Sam, for always being there as well. My party man. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.